All right, welcome to A Foundation for Performance-Based Education by Michael Carpenter uh, for the American Public University. So in this presentation, we're going to talk about school choice policies within Arizona. And in order to do that, we need to take a step back and examine what led to school choice policy creation. And so we're going to take a step back and look at the education system of the United States as a whole for just a brief moment. The administration of education in the United States was largely left to the states, as the 10th Amendment of the United States Constitution provides that all authority not explicitly given to the federal government should remain with the states. This power was then delegated to local and municipalities by the state due to the complexities of managing an education system in the early years of the nation. In 1867, the United States government formed the Department of Education to assist states and local governments in crafting and managing a more unified education system across all states. This joint approach by federal and state authorities led to the creation and passage of numerous federal regulations to ensure standardization and uniformity. In 1954, the federal government took perhaps the largest step in our history to assume some authority over the American education system. And this was done through the Supreme Court ruling in Brown versus Board of Education, which provided that the federal government would have the authority to intercede in any matter of education in which there existed the perception of sanctioned discrimination. This granted the federal government regulatory authority over education systems to ensure that all states provided equality in educational opportunity. Since that time, there's been a growing call for educational reform in several different areas, including budgeting, curriculum, and parental rights, among others. This, in conjunction with an increasing focus on new public management theory, which within public organizations and the desire to obtain public participation in decisions relating to public service provided some expediency for political and public authorities to consider alternatives in public education systems. Arizona began implementing school choice initiatives in 1994 and 1995 in that school year, with the adoption of policies allowing charter schools to support the state's growing student population while also receiving earmarked education funding. Then when we fast forward to today, in terms of school choice, Arizona is ranked number one by EdChoice in terms of school choice policies. And while Arizona has been ahead of the curve in terms of school choice policy initiatives, there's still significant challenges surrounding sustainability, scalability, and even academic achievement. So in this presentation, we're going to take a closer look at some of the policy challenges facing school choice in Arizona. We're going to provide context to existing policies, address current policy implementations, and then evaluate where we are today and what it'll take to get us where we want to go, followed by some recommendations to help us get there. Okay, so public education institutions in Arizona have traditionally operated on a district and boundary basis. So this framework requires that students attend an assigned public school relative to their geographical location and their residency status. So, for example, a student living in Mesa, Arizona, where I live, would be required to attend a school within the Mesa Public School District and would then be assigned to an appropriate school nearest to their residence. So, school choice and voucher programs provide parents greater control over their students' education by allowing them to select which school their child attends within a reasonable context. However, these programs have remained largely limited in Arizona due to various concerns ranging from school and classroom capacities, limitations in school transportation, and how funding would work among some other issues. These concerns have led many policymakers to only consider school choice options for families in certain situations. So, for example, you might think about advanced placement programs or special education programs. Growing demands for school choice options within Arizona and states across the nation have created capacity concerns and forced school districts to allow access to these programs only through a state lottery system, which is something similar to what we have here. Now, however, in 1994, as we talked about previously, Arizona adjusted its policies authorizing charter schools to operate within the state and allowing them to accept public funding similarly to a traditional public institution. This assisted the state in opening up additional seats for students, reducing classroom sizes, and alleviating some of the pressures of overcrowding in traditional public schools. However, charter schools and school choice programs also created some contention as they both take funding away from the traditional public education institutions. Today, little has really changed, with many policymakers and education administrators concerned about how school choice policies will impact public school funding. Public institutions in Arizona have traditionally used incremental budgeting practices when forecasting spending and expenditures. So, incremental budgeting is a methodology used by public organizations which adopts smaller budgetary increases over time rather than a broader increase, which may seem less palatable to the general public. Um, this methodology demonstrates some ethical dilemmas in public education, as the primary budgeting factors used to determine future budgets is the institution's previous year budgets rather than performance. So this makes incorporating performance-based approaches, which focus on academic achievement and institutional outcomes, more difficult to adopt over time, as many schools would likely see a significant decrease in funding. This leads to added resistance from educational administrators in adopting school choice policy models. So, furthermore, performance based approaches are not a silver bullet and they're not without their own unique pitfalls. Adopting traditional performance based budgeting approaches can have unintended consequences when modeled in an educational setting due to underperforming schools losing funding. So, for example, should a school fail to meet mandated benchmarks and become subject to budgetary cuts, it may create further difficulties for the institution to recover from such instances over time, and over time could produce a cycle of lower achievement for the school. So, before examining school choice and making considerations for its expansion, it's imperative that policymakers and education administrators come together to fully understand what academic achievement looks like and how performance based approaches can be intuitively integrated into the traditional incremental methodologies used to ensure compatibility with school choice policies. Okay, let's look at at what's actually being done in Arizona today. So, school choice policies allow public funding to be allocated to the student regardless if that enrollment is at a public or private institution. These policies would also allow parents to make determinations on the school their child attends and remove school and district boundary limitations. Arizona, like many other states, has compulsory education laws that require that children between certain ages receive some form of educational instruction to achieve specific state mandated benchmarks. Typically, that age is 6 to 16 years old. Although the state of Arizona does not limit what type of educational institution a student may attend, the state does restrict how and when funding may be allocated. At least traditionally, that's how that worked. Currently, Arizona only allows public funding to be paid out to public and charter schools, um, and requires that any student attending a public school do so in accordance with district policies. So that piece of the legislation itself and the policy does create some challenges, which we're going to talk about as we progress through the presentation. So this places limitations on Arizona families, as most school districts have established boundaries which require students to attend schools closer to their geographic location rather than allowing parents to choose a school based upon its academic performance and standing in the community. So school choice has gained significant momentum over recent years, largely due to a desire by parents to have more control over their child's education. By creating a market-oriented school choice framework, Arizona families feel that They would have more control over their child's education and force schools to contend and compete with other institutions, creating opportunities for schools to become more effective, efficient, and responsive to the needs of the community as a whole. So, right now, there are still limitations that exist with Arizona's school choice policy, limiting it to those primary two areas being charter schools or private charter schools or public institutions. But public institutions are hesitant to adopt these policies, and since the law is written that the school still can use their own policies, they're still able to limit the parents and students through their district boundaries. Okay, so implementation. School choice in Arizona currently has a few implementation challenges. While charter schools are widespread, there has been significant hesitation from public schools, like we just mentioned, to adopt school choice policies, allowing students to bypass boundaries and enroll in schools outside of their area or assigned district. Public administrators have instead adopted a lottery approach. In Arizona and in a lot of other states, this is known as empowerment scholarships, in which parents must give reasonable cause as to why their student should be granted enrollment at another public institution. While this hesitation is likely due to concerns over the loss of public funding within a particular school district, it may actually be contributing to greater funding losses over time, as students who are not selected from the school choice lottery are more likely to find another public option that suits their needs, or another non public option, I'm sorry. Arizona's school choice lottery system Arizona's lottery system is perhaps the biggest barrier in truly understanding the effectiveness and efficiency of these type of programs at a larger scale. When catering to specific student demographics such as advanced placement, at-risk, and special education students, it becomes difficult to accurately assess how a program is functioning or meeting community expectations. This also becomes a challenge as not all educational benchmarks and achievement metrics are aligned across all the districts, counties, and cities within the state of Arizona. So while state and federal benchmarks and standards exist, how these measurements are recorded and reported to the public pose concerns surrounding transparency. Parents can easily look up a school district ranking online today, but these metrics often translate into a bird's eye snapshot rather than an in depth assessment of the school's actual performance. So, to give you an example of this, schools are typically broken down into various departments such as special education, traditional classroom is kind of encompasses everything, and then like advanced placement. Those are just a few examples. With school choice, it becomes necessary to understand these breakdowns within a particular um, school and how that population demographic may have impacted the school's ranking. So, for instance, a school with a larger than average advanced placement population or gifted and talented population may reflect a higher score on SAT, ACT, and state testing such as Ames and AZ Merit over other schools with larger traditional classroom or special education populations. Transparency in performance measurements is extremely important to ensure that parents and students have the information they need to make educational decisions. While this reporting is also instrumental in establishing some form of a performance based benchmark or benchmark system at the state level. So, in terms of the implementation, Arizona has done a really good job of tracking education dollars, ensuring that enrollment projections are continually adjusted as a means of ensuring funding is distributed appropriately, which is important as schools who take on unexpected students through these type of programs have to make adjustments to their existing funding resources until educational funding clears state auditors for distribution, which is usually completed mid-school year or in Arizona, it's like the 100th day a student has to be in school for 100 days, and then that funding can be released to that institution. So Arizona has taken the stance on limiting school transportation, however, to only students who do reside within the traditional boundaries and requires that parents take responsibility for their students' transportation when participating in the school choice program. That's not to say that there are some some charter schools that do provide transportation. However, they also have similar districts set up as to try and maintain school transportation in a sustainable and attainable fashion. All right, so we'll go ahead and get into the evaluation piece now. So the first thing we're going to look at is the policy's effectiveness. So understanding the effectiveness of school choice policies in Arizona should basically be measured upon the program's ability to meet its proposed outcomes. Arizona's school choice promised three core outcomes to families and students within the state: to provide students with greater educational options, allow non-public institutions of learning funding, and to improve academic achievement across the state. The explosions of charter schools in Arizona, totaling nearly 625 schools today, which serve approximately 170,000 students, with a much larger set of provides a much larger set of options when considering their educational goals. This increase in non-public schools is largely due to the allowance of state funding into these institutions, enabling them to serve vast student populations in the state. However, the core piece of school choice policy within the state of Arizona is tied to academic achievement, and not just the choice of location. So, a national assessment of educational progress report from 2017, which measured eighth grade reading and mathematics performance, found that Arizona charter schools continue to surpass public institutions by significant margins. So taking these kind of things into consideration, it does appear that school choice policies in Arizona are meeting their intended outcomes and demonstrating effectiveness to students and the public as a whole, at least from an effectiveness standpoint. The next thing we're going to look at is efficiency. So efficiency is examining the cost to benefit ratio and ensuring that the state is being good stewards of public funds. So efficiency is determined by a policy's ability to meet the proposed outcome while maintaining a sustainable physical approach and responsibility by public leaders, is an easier way to say that. The state of Arizona projected that the adoption of school choice policies within the state would save residents approximately $3.4 million by the year 2021. And this was back in 2016 when they first rolled out some of these new changes. In 2017, a report by the Arizona Charter Schools Association um, stated that the state had saved $1 million through corporate and community partnerships by funding the state's charter schools, allowing for a reasonable assumption that by 2021 the state will exceed the initial savings proposal. So they do release the budgets every year, but they have not released a statement for 2018 or 2019 that I was able to locate that gave an approximation of savings over those years. But if in the first year they were able to save 1 million, they're already just about a third of the way there. So now that's not to say that through that the true efficiency of the program cannot be fully analyzed by the 21 deadline, but unforeseeable challenges may pose additional physical burdens on the state, such as, a good example is the current COVID-19 crisis that we're experiencing today. But initial reports and projections clearly demonstrate that the state's moving in the right direction in terms of physical responsibility and maintaining a positive cost-benefit ratio for residents. So while we won't know with 100% certainty until 2021 if that commitment was achieved, and there's been a lot of things kind of thrown in the ringer right now with this COVID-19 virus and pandemic, but as of right now, it does appear that the state is maintaining a high level of efficiency. Okay, so equity. So Arizona recently amended policies surrounding its lottery enrollment process into school choice programs to allow for 100% acceptance of students in households with incomes at 250% of the federal poverty level, which equates to a household income of $60,000 a year in Arizona for a family of four. This, in combination with the state's rapid expansion of charter schools, creates an equitable education system which caters to a vast population throughout the state. The only limitation is found with non-low income families' ability to remain within the public school system should they desire, within the school choice program, due to the resistance we talked about before by public school districts in allowing for cross-district and cross-school enrollment. However, students still have a significantly increased level of choice outside of the traditional public school framework. Therefore, while the system demonstrates a high level of equity, there is still some room for improvement. Okay, now is school choice being ethically implemented? So, ethical concerns arise with claims that school choice harms public schools due to reductions in funding. This is likely an accurate assumption, as approximately 170,000 students in Arizona have withdrawn from traditional public school systems and reallocated that funding to non-public charter school systems. So each student equates to approximately $8,300 per student in Arizona, which equates to roughly $1.5 billion in losses um, to these public institutions. However, school choice programs overall create significant benefits to individual students and families while improving educational achievement across the state. So, this would be more considered a restructuring of education rather than having any type of negative ethical impact. So, um, this one's you can kind of go either way on it. From my viewpoint in researching this, I still feel that the policy is ethical. All right. Now we'll start talking about the feasibility. And so we're going to look at two different areas of feasibility. We're going to look at socially feasible as well as politically feasible. So social and political feasibility are closely tied together when discussing most areas of public policy. However, this may be truer with education due to the extent at which it impacts society. Political positions and stances held by the public can more easily be shifted with issues surrounding education due to how these policies impact a substantial portion of the state's budget, how it impacts academic income or outcomes, long term economic growth, and community engagement. School choice has garnered increasing support over the last several years due to increasing options for families. In traditional public schools, restrictions prevent many low income and disadvantaged communities from obtaining a higher quality education. School choice programs allow for parents to determine their students' academic opportunity, thereby helping to break down the perpetuation of poverty. This, in conjunction with other key factors and factors such as the attention that lower education taxation brings from taxpayers, and the fact that non-public institutions are consistently outperforming traditional schools, creates a unique political opportunity for elected officials. This makes school choice an ideal policy to get behind in order to garner public support. So we can see that by the growing increase of the student population within school choice programs, as well as the growing support for school choice programs, and that politicians are getting behind this, that there appears to be feasibility on both sides of that spectrum. Okay, let's go to the conclusion and recommendations. So, data collected from Arizona school choice programs clearly indicates that these policy options are working where they're being implemented. And the integration of publicly funded charter schools fulfills the state's commitment to enhancing options for families, reducing education expenditures, and improving academic performance. However, there are some key flaws in the existing policies surrounding school choice. Public school systems have been hesitant to fully implement these policies, and there is not currently any state mandate requiring their complete participation, as the state largely leaves up to school districts and their respective policies. This creates several challenges when attempting to collect and analyze data at scale because key components of the policy implementation are virtually non-existent. Um, when the policies have been adopted, there are some key points that may serve as indicators in the future of these programs. So across the United States, charter school enrollment is growing exponentially, with the percentage of schools with student bodies of 300 to over 1,000 increasing year over year, and the number of schools claiming less than 300 students declining between the years 2001 and 2016. So this just demonstrates that these charter schools' student bodies are growing. Arizona's charter school population is no exception, with an average annual increase of 10,000 students a year into the program. This growing trend of students opting to transition away from public school systems, and the data demonstrating the very consistent performance achieved by charter schools will likely mean that school choice policies are here to stay in Arizona. Although Arizona has done an excellent job in ensuring that their commitments are achieved, it is important for policymakers within the state to address some key challenges. So let's take a look at what those challenges are and what our recommendations might be. In order for school choice programs within the state to grow and flourish, it's imperative that state legislators take steps to ensure transparency and accurate performance data. To achieve this, legislators should amend existing policies to require the participation of all educational institutions receiving public funding. That would bring public education systems into the fold and allow us to look at this at a more scaled approach. This would enable broader data collection and increase transparency for the use of the general public as well as key stakeholders. This would also allow for the elimination of states' lottery-based systems and further grow options for students. Additionally, the formation of more intuitive tracking systems to ensure student funding and curriculum oversight may prove beneficial to deter any potential long-term consequences and maintain state standardization and uniformity within the state's education system. Student funding is a key element of school choice and forms the foundation for improving educational outcomes in the state. So this creates a performance-based approach to education while also allowing schools greater control over their own budgeting policies and methodologies, such as incremental approaches. Um, so all in all, the policy really would not take any significant overhaul to make these adoptions. The biggest barrier for school choice in Arizona is the resistance or the resistance of public education institutions not wanting to participate. But also, again, we go back to what we discussed earlier, in that fear of losing funding and being hesitant to adopt these policies may actually be helping them lose additional funding by moving students away from the public education system to more charter-based options. All right, thank you for taking some time to listen to this presentation today. I've also listed all of our references for research on the next 3 slides, and I hope you have a great day.